All right, hi everybody. I'm Rabbi Micah Streifer. I'm excited to study with you today for our weekly Tikvah Through Text. And I'm excited today to welcome a regular member of the La'asok community, learning community. Rabbi Shirah Kraus is part of our Talmud study group on Monday, where she contributes so much knowledge and wisdom to the discussion that we have every week. Rabbi Shira is also a Reform rabbi who lives in the Cincinnati area and who serves as the part-time rabbi of Temple Shalom in Lafayette, Louisiana. And in case you're wondering, no, that's not a drive. She flies every few weeks from Cincinnati to Lafayette, Louisiana to serve the congregation there. I'm excited to study with her and to welcome her to this community. Let's start with our blessing for study. So as we always do, I want you to unmute yourself if you feel comfortable and join with me in this blessing together. Baruch atah
Baruch atah
Adonai
Adonai,
Eloheinu melech
Eloheinu
haolam
Haolam,
asher
Asher
kitshanu b'mitzvotav
Kiddushanu
v'tzivanu
b'mitzvotav
la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Torah.
Blessed is the Eternal, whose mitzvot, whose commandments make us holy, and who commands us to immerse, to engage in words of Torah. Rabbi Shirah Kraus, take it away.
Hi everybody, good morning. I think it's morning for everybody unless you're like way far east. I'm so glad to be teaching with you today. I'm going to be talking about prophets, and I'm going to share my screen in a second. But I just want to say, please feel free to jump in at any time, ask questions, make comments. It can be hard to see the chat, so Rabbi Micah is going to help me with that. But feel free to unmute and jump in at any time. So, and thank you for that introduction. So, can everyone see the screen? Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, awesome. So, when I was in rabbinical school, my final year, I did my final capstone project on the prophets. And so when Rabbi Mike asked me to teach, I was thinking the prophets are where I think a lot of hope can come from. So the title of this teaching is Prophetic Imagination, the Power of Prophetic Poetry in Desperate Times. So the prophets, the Hebrew prophets, are imaginative, they're poetic, and I think they can bring us a lot of hope when things seem hopeless. So I always like to start my teaching with a little bit of just intention setting, just to remind us all. I know we're all, grown-ups and know how to talk to each other, but sometimes we forget, and just to kind of set that intention. So be hospitable and inclusive, be as fully present as possible, speak form from yourself only using I statements, listen with your body, your imagination, and your curiosity, and when you disagree, do so respectfully, and share the mic. And then my intentions in my teaching is to create a welcoming and inclusive environment, facilitate meaningful conversation, and share a topic and questions that I'm passionate about. Are there any questions about these intentions? Does that sound good? Can we all thumbs up that we can do that today? Awesome. So just a couple of framing questions to think about, and this is part of what framed my study of the prophets, is what was the message of the Hebrew prophets in their own times? What is their message as it rings true today? And then specifically for today, how do they inspire hope? So, okay, I want to invite everybody to put in the chat, when you hear prophet, prophetic, or prophetic tradition, what are some words or images or things that come to mind when you hear those words? So feel free to just pop in the chat some things that come up. Justice, awesome. Social justice, chesed, truth, chastisement, courage, nice. Heschel, yep. Predetermination, vision, Jerusalem syndrome. Our relationship with God, Moses. Okay, these are all really good. So for the purpose of today and the study that I did in school, I decided to focus on the specifically what we call the literary prophets. So those are like Isaiah, Jeremiah, um, the prophets who have like the books named after them and are allegedly the writers of those books. Um, and so those specific prophets, the Hebrew prophets, I think from my study, I determined that they were defined by five things. One is that they tend to emphasize community and society over the individual, so they're collectivist. Number two is that they're universalist. So they do care about rituals, but they don't ever want rituals to supersede universal justice and ethics. And then I see them as seers, listeners, and speakers. So in some traditions, prophets are sort of predicting the future, like our prophecy. You think about like the prophecy at Delphi or something like that is like there's some prophesy of like what's going to happen in the future. I think that the Hebrew prophets are less about predicting the future and more about sharing what is possible beyond the here and now. And we're going to talk more about that. That's why I highlighted it, because they have this ability to imagine what's possible. Um, they're listeners in the sense that they are sort of vessels for God's word and God's mission. They're called by God to perform that mission. And they're speakers. They're bold, honest, imaginative, poetic, effective. And their words have endured for centuries, millennia even. And I think sometimes people are critical of the prophets for being like not very effective. So if you're evaluating them from the point of view of, were they good community organizers? I think that's a fair critique. But I think that it's better to kind of see them more as poets, and their words have had enduring and meaningful power over many, many years. Okay, wait, before we do this question, are there any questions or comments so far? I'm just going to stop sharing for a second just to kind of see. I just shared a little bit of information and I kind of want to see if anyone has anything they want to jump in with, anything that's come up so far. Yeah, Vicky. You got,
When you say it,
oh, you're a little
it-
glitchy.
oh, it's my Wi-Fi, which drives me nuts.
Okay, I
Yep,
can
the
hear you better
internet.
now.
Okay. It's when you talk about them, you say they imagine what is possible
Mm-hmm.
rather than a direct, this will happen if you
Mm-hmm.
don't do X, Y, Z. So I think that's a lovely way to look at it. So it gives hope in the way of if we work towards this is possible rather than strict determination without putting in any input. So I kind of like that. So
Yeah.
I just think that's an interesting way to look at the prophets. It's a way that maybe I can accept better than somebody telling me sort of a predestined thing that no matter what I do or what happens, this is going to happen regardless. So thanks. So
Yeah.
I agree with Vicky. I second that. I was very excited when you used that word, and I thought, well, that's a lovely way instead of, well, you're not going to do this. I know you're not going to do this because you never do. So, you're in trouble. But rather, I want you to know. And then the people can say, oh, great, I want to do that. So, very nice. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I know it's a little bit abstract right now. We're going to look at a couple of examples, but I think this is very much in line with what Rabbi Shai held, who recently authored the book Judaism is About Love. I've heard and read some of his thoughts about, he talks about something called possibilism, and that I think that the prophets are very much in that vein of they're not saying this is what's going to happen, but they're kind of laying out what's possible, which also aligns with other biblical texts of, if you do the right thing, this is what will happen. If you do the wrong thing, this is what will happen. But it's not set in stone one way or the other. And we always have the power to turn back and change our fate. I saw a question in the chat about how did the prophets become prophets? So, from my understanding, there may be an exception that I don't know about, but part of what makes a prophet is that they receive some sort of calling from God to be prophets, sort of essential to that role. Okay. Thank you for those insights. Beautiful. So we're going to continue with a little bit of some examples and other things. So put in the chat a poem or a song that gives you hope. Maybe something you listen to or read when you're having a hard day or something like that. Ashkivenu, yeah, that's a nice one. Imagine. Mm-hmm. Give it a second. Something that maybe uplifts you when you're having a hard time or inspires you when the world seems like it's a huge mess. Yeah. You've got a friend. Oh, that's a nice one. Get together. So feel free to raise your hand, unmute. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. And Cheryl, what is it about that song or that poem or those words that are hopeful for you? Yeah, Sabrina.
I put in Holy, Holy, Holy Lord God of hosts, heaven and earth are full of your glory, Hosanna in the highest. Because the imagining the glory of the Lord brings me awe and joy and hopefulness.
Yeah, thank you. So is it is the music of it and the words together something that you find meaningful, or is it one or the other?
For me, both.
Yeah,
But oftentimes in the liturgy, it may not be chanted. It may just be spoken where I attend worship. Yeah.
thank you. Any others? A lot of good examples in the chat here. Emma Lazarus. Yeah, Rabbi Micah.
I said Imagine by John Lennon, and I think, I mean, first of all, it's a song that goes way back for me. I've loved it most of my life. But also just I think the capacity to imagine a world that's different than the one that we live in right now, to me, that is the seed of hope.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's very much, it's almost like you knew what we were going to talk about today. Thank you guys for sharing all these wonderful songs. And I really love poetry also just in general. And there are certain poems that I'll read, before I'm about to do something that I'm a little nervous about, or if I'm having a hard day. And there's something about both the content of the language and the rhetoric of the language, and sometimes with song also the music, that can just be really comforting. And the reason I asked that question is because I think that that's a frame that can help us think about. Yeah, also, Melissa, yes, that's a good point. Imagine no religion. Yeah, maybe we'll excise that line. So I want us to think about how the prophets, they write and speak in poetic language, and I think that is one of the things that lends this imaginative power, this hope and uplifting power. So I did not invent this term, prophetic imagination. There's a Christian theologian and writer named Walter Brueggemann. He wrote a book called Prophetic Imagination. I've also listened to his podcast on Being with Krista Tippett. And so that's where I've gotten a lot of these ideas of what, prophets imagined and put into language a different reality than the current one, which we've talked about already, and using poetic language because it's imaginative and creative. And we say in poetry, anything is possible. So, I pressed the wrong button. Hold on a second. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So here's something that Brueggemann said in the podcast. Actually, can we have a volunteer unmute and read this quote, please?
I can read if nobody else wants to, but if someone else wants to, please feel free.
I'll read it.
Thanks, Jackie.
Our consumer culture wants somehow to narcoticize us so that we just settle in on things. I think Kafka maybe said that a poet or a novelist is like a pickaxe that attacks the way we've gotten things arranged. And I think these poems are like pickaxes that are not welcome among us. But we're going to miss out on the reality of our life if we are narcoticized both about the loss and about the newness.
Thank you very much. The reason I picked this quote is because I think basically what Brueggemann is saying is that there's a lot of forces out there that keep us complacent in the way things are, and poems and prophetic poetry has this power to kind of wake us up, and we don't always want to hear that. We don't always want to face that, but it pushes us to not just settle in the way things are. And just to kind of drive it home a little bit more, he says, the task of prophetic ministry is to nurture, nourish, and evoke a consciousness and perception alternative to the consciousness and perception of the dominant culture around us. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of examples now. So taking it from the little bit more abstract to a little more literal. So this is a quote that maybe many of you know. It's pretty short, and I think it really helps us to kind of see this prophetic poetry, prophetic imagination in action. So the way I highlighted it is so you can see where the different parts of speech are. So this is from Amos 5:24, and he says, Vayigal kamay mishpat utzdaka kenachal eitan. So we have in yellow is the verb, and then kamayim, like water, mishpat, justice, utzdaka, and righteousness, kenachal eitan, like an unfailing stream. So it's this, we have the verb first, and then A, B, B, A, kind of poetic pattern here. And in English, and actually I think Martin Luther King Jr. maybe was the one who made this quote one of the most famous pieces of prophetic writing. Let justice well up like water and righteousness like an unfailing stream. So I have a couple questions for us to think about. What poetic devices are evident in this text? What images and feelings does this text conjure for you, and in what ways does this text inspire hope? So feel free to either share in the chat or unmute, and I'm going to catch up on the chat. Okay, lots of love for different songs. Awesome. To answer Melissa's question in the chat, the vav here can be translated with and or but or whatever, and most translators will kind of decide based on the context of which conjunction makes the most sense. So I don't recall off the top of my head what comes right before this, but I imagine that it's something different than just rolling up, so the conjunction but kind of makes sense. Yeah, poetic devices, metaphor, imagery, simile, yep. Yes, it's an unusual expression to think of justice welling up. Yeah, I think the imagery is really beautiful. The hope, force, and ubiquity of water. Yeah, I think water can be really hopeful. Imagery of water is really powerful. Water is an image of life and power. You can't stop a waterfall. Yeah, I think there's something, the Nachal Eitan, an unfailing stream. It's like, yeah, you can't, and this is before we had something like the Hoover Dam. So it's unstoppable. And I think there's something really powerful about that. Water unlocks a seed. Yeah, beautiful. Yes, very timely. I think that's one of the things I love about the prophetic texts is that they're still really relevant today. Can't stop a rising flood. Parallelism, yep. And if I remember correctly, the ABBA pattern is called chiasmus. Yeah. Thanks, Rabbi Micah. Awesome. These are great thoughts. So we're going to look at one other example. So this is from Hosea. And one of the things I wanted to, we may be less familiar with Hosea, so I'm going to give just a tiny bit of context. The book of Hosea is basically this extended metaphor of this unfaithful wife who cheats on God by worshiping other idols. And so I want to, even though I've been very positivist about what, about my description of the prophets, they do have some not super warm and fuzzy things to say as well. So I wanted to kind of give that example. So in Hosea 14:1, he says, Samaria must bear her guilt, for she has defied her God. They shall fall by the sword, their infants shall be dashed to death, and their women with child ripped open. So that's not the most ideal situation. But the reason I wanted to share this text is that, so this is the last chapter of Hosea, and even though there's all of this chastisement, as someone put in the chat earlier, and punishment, hope and love and the possibility of teshuvah and return has the last word. So just a few verses later, I will heal their affliction. Generously will I take them back in love, for my anger is turned away from them. I will be to Israel like dew. He shall blossom like the lily. He shall strike root like a Lebanon tree. His boughs shall spread out far. His beauty shall be like the olive trees. His fragrance like that of Lebanon. And so I wanted to put these two side by side because even though the prophets don't necessarily shy away from the gory, they always end with hope. So again, I want to look at these questions with this text. What poetic devices are evident? What images and feelings does this text bring up for you? And in what ways does this text inspire hope? Oh, that's a
I
good
know this
question.
sounds kind of silly, but I always felt bad for his wife because her name was Dorcas, and that's kind of a bad name to have to deal with. It's a kind of an off-putting name. I mean, I do have other thoughts I'll put in the chat, but I just have to kind of feel sorry for Dorcas every time I read Jose.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And there's a question in the chat about why the masculine pronoun is used. That's a good question. I'm wondering what the antecedent is. I wonder if it's referring. I'm not sure. Maybe it's because the word Yisrael is masculine. Yeah, is that right, Rabbi Micah?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
Yisrael Yifrach Kisha. Yeah, so that's
yeah.
why. But you could also, Hebrew is a gendered language, so you could translate it differently. I just took this translation from Sepharia. So metaphor, yeah, love, relationship, plant growth, and plant beauty. Yeah. I know that if I learn, when I behave like Dorcas, I know that if I learn and repent, then God will have favor for me as well. Yeah. So I do want to say we didn't look at the entire book of Hosea, and there is some really troubling patriarchal stuff and violent stuff, but I do think that one of the takeaways is that even when we mess up, that there's still an opportunity to come back.
Can I just share a quick comment?
Please.
I noticed again, putting this text next to the other one that you shared, that there's imagery of water again, being dew. It's not the hard, rushing water you can't hold back justice. This is more like a loving, nurturing, dew that causes blossoming, right? So it's water, but it's a totally different, much more loving, much more gentle image of water here.
Yeah, thank you. And I think nature metaphors and imagery are very common in these texts too, which I think can create this sense of of nourishment and growth, and also, it's very very important to our ancestors, who are agricultural community, and I'm really dependent on that for their survival. Thank you for that. Okay, so I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I just wanted to share some lingering questions. These are just some things to keep thinking about as you, wherever you come across prophets, whether it's in a Haftarah reading, or I don't know, where else do people come? When we sing about Elijah and on Passover or Havdalah. How should we read the prophets? Why should we study prophets? And what impact does studying prophets have on us? And I think there's many, many responses to these questions, but one I hope is that the prophets can inspire us and help us imagine things that are different than how they might be right now, and be able to see into a future that's different from the current reality and be hopeful about what's possible. I'm going to stop my share and just see if there's any final comments or questions. I think we look both historically and also to give us hope. Yeah. Yeah. Even if they were speaking to different circumstances historically, they can apply to things we're facing today. Mm-hmm. And it looks like Rabbi Micah just put in the chat, thank you for being here. If you appreciate the programming, please consider a donation to Lavasuk. Thank you, everyone, for joining in today. I hope this was meaningful.
I want to say a huge thank you to Rabbi Shirah for teaching us today. I happen to love the prophets. And so along those lines, I want to make two quick announcements. One is, if you love the prophets, I just figured out, or sort of has settled, that next year we're going to have a weekly Haftarah study group. So if you're already studying Torah with us, consider coming to study the Haftarot, which are the prophetic readings that sit alongside the Torah portion. I'll have more information about that over the summer. It will start in October with the beginning of the Torah cycle. Meanwhile, next week we're back here to study with Rabbi Lauren Tuckman, who we've studied with before, who is a wonderful teacher. In the meantime, I wish you all a Chag Shavuot Sameach. I hope we all have some good learning, maybe some good cheesecake or ice cream, or whatever it is that you'll be using to celebrate the sweetness of Torah tonight and tomorrow. Chag Sameach, everybody. Shabbat Shalom, and we'll see each other next week. Thanks again to Rabbi Shirah.
Thanks, everybody.
Samaya.
Thank you.